Welcome back to Things You Don't Know. Today, we're going underwater, literally and culturally, to talk about Aquaman, not just a character, but what he represents. The shifting way comics handle power, nature, empire, masculinity, and more recently, our anxiety about the planet's future.
Yes, and we're also dealing with the fact that Aquaman lives two public lives at the same time. The first one, his serious ruler of Atlantis, heavy responsibilities, ocean politics. The other is guy who talks to fish.
Which is a real cultural phenomenon. A character can be iconic and ridiculed simultaneously. Aquaman is one of the best examples of how pop culture creates a reputation and how comics spend decades trying to revise it.
So, here's the plan. We'll cover how Aquaman came about, the publication history, etc., what changed across eras, and the bigger question, why he matters culturally, and what he reveals about the times that kept reinventing him.
Aquaman first appeared in 1941 in More Fun Comics issue 73. That's a wartime moment. The U.S. has just entered World War II, and American popular culture is saturated with naval imagery, submarines, and the idea that the ocean is a strategic frontier. Aquaman arrives as a hero who belongs to that space.
And yes, Dr. Deneen, you're right when you say that this was 1941. What was the big fear that we were going through there and leading up to that period of time? U-boats, right?
Absolutely.
So he's basically a superhero answer to what if the sea had its own protector?
Exactly. Early Aquaman stories are often about ships in danger. Sabotage, pirates, underwater threats, stuff that fits the fears and fantasies of the early 1940s.
And there's a key point here. Aquaman begins as a DC anthology feature, not the star of his own universe right away. In that era, characters are tested in shared titles. If audience respond, they survive. If not, they don't.
So he's born in the same ecosystem as a lot of Golden Age heroes. Lots of experimentation, lots of short features, and readers voting with attention.
And more importantly, he lasts. Aquaman doesn't vanish after the war. He's one of the DC heroes who keeps showing up through the late 1940s and into the 50s.
Yeah, that is kind of interesting, isn't it, Dr. Deneen?
Very much so. The life cycle of some of these heroes is only a couple of months if they don't catch on.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. So let's talk about how he came about in story, because Aquaman's identity changes across eras. A lot of listeners know him as Arthur Curry, tied to Atlantis, but that is not the only version.
You're absolutely right, Dr. Weaver. This is a classic comics move. Characters get reframed. And Aquaman's big reframing comes in what's called the Silver Age. In Adventure Comics 260, which is cover dated May of 1959, Aquaman is presented as Arthur Curry, the son of a lighthouse keeper, Tom Curry, and Atlanta, an Atlantean outcast, giving him a dual heritage and a clear mythic anchor in Atlantis.
That's right, Dr. Neen, and that dual heritage is doing a lot of work. He's not just some sea guy. He is a bridge between worlds, surface and ocean, human and Atlantean.
Can you even imagine, Chandler, what that must be like? And who came up with that kind of a notion? Sort of part fish, part human, something like that?
Yeah, that's kind of interesting to me. A human.
It reminds me of a Greek demigod that's half human and half horse or eagle or something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and indeed. And culturally, that matters because it gives Aquaman a built in theme: belonging and obligation. He can't fully leave the ocean behind because guess what? It's part of him. He also can't ignore the surface world because guess what? That's also a part of him.
It's also a shift in what superhero stories want to be in the late 1950s. They're becoming more sophisticated, more continuity, more science fiction style world building, more supporting casts, more of a structured myth.
Yeah, the structured myth. Okay. So, yeah. So this is where a lot of people get kind of fuzzy. If Arthur starts as a surface kid, how does he end up living under the sea? And why does Atlantis become more than just a setting?
The clean answer is, in the most familiar modern version, Arthur isn't a normal human like Spider-Man who adapts later. Check out our Spider-Man podcast if you can. He is born with Atlantean physiology. As we said, he's the son of a human lighthouse keeper, Tom Curry, and Atlanta, tied to Atlantis, often depicted as either Atlantan royalty or an Atlantan exile. That heritage is what lets him breathe underwater, survive extreme amounts of pressure, and move like the ocean is his natural environment.
So it's not like he takes a potion or gets a lab upgrade. It's more like he's always had the capability, but he's raised in the surface world first. So the real transition is social and political, not just biological here, folks.
Exactly, Chandler. He grows up with one foot on land, but as we said, he can't stay just a surface person forever because Atlantis is not just a random underwater city in his story, it's his lineage. Atlantis is where the identity Aquaman becomes bigger than a superhero name. It becomes you're connected to and responsible for a nation.
Yes, he is responsible for Atlantis. And that's the hinge. Aquaman is one of the few big name superheroes whose job description can shift from hero to head of state.
Yeah. So when does he actually move undersea, Dr. Deneen?
That varies by the era, but the pattern is consistent. It's once Arthur learns who he is. Once Atlantis calls or its politics collide with the surface, he becomes pulled into Atlantean life. Sometimes that's mentorship, sometimes it's crisis, sometimes it's political secession. But eventually, he's not simply visiting Atlantis, he's ruling it, and as we said, he's responsible for it.
And that responsibility changes his home address. If you're trying to keep peace between two worlds or protect an entire undersea civilization, you can't govern Atlantis from a beach house.
No, you can't, Dr. Weaver. And also, this is kind of underrated here. Living underwater isn't portrayed as exotic to him. In a lot of continuity, the ocean is where he is fully himself, but the surface is where he has to translate.
That's right. And to add a historical layer, in his earliest golden age telling, the origin leans more toward undersea discovery and training. His father is described as an underwater explorer who finds an ancient submerged city and raises him around its technology and environment. That version already explains the same outcome. Arthur becomes comfortable living beneath the wave because that's where he's formed.
So, whether it's the golden age, quote, raised around undersea ruins, or the later half Atlantean air, the result is the same. Aquaman doesn't merely control the ocean, he belongs to it. Then Atlantis turns that belonging into a duty to govern and to take care of it.
And that right there is the connection that people tend to miss here, folks. Atlantis isn't just a cool backdrop. It's the reason that Aquaman's story can be about identity, legitimacy, and politics, all rolled into one, not just sea monsters.
Yes, Chandler, you're right, and that's a good way to put that. Okay, let's shift here and look at the publication history because Aquaman's journey tells you a lot about the industry. Maybe, Dr. Deneen, could you fill us in on where that starts?
Sure, Aquaman starts in more fun comics. Then he moves along with other features as titles change direction in the 50s. He appears in adventure comics for long stretches, and he's notable, as I said before, for surviving eras that wiped out a lot of costumed heroes.
So he's kind of like a persistent utility player for DC.
Where'd you come up with that phrase there, Chandler? That's a
Well, I
good
don't know. I
one.
just kind of pulled it out of the water here. No pun intended. But that means that whenever they need an adventure feature with a recognizable hero, boop, he's there.
Then in the early 60s, you get a big step. Aquaman runs in Showcase. That's a DC testbed title. And soon after, he launches a solo series. Wikipedia's publication summary notes. The first solo Aquaman series began in the early 60s and runs for dozens of issues before ending in the 70s. In the 70s, it was also on the famous Super Friends cartoon on television.
That's true. And the meta point is Aquaman's solo title exists, disappears, comes back, shifts into backdrops, returns again, like the character is constantly being evaluated against changing markets.
Which tracks with how fans talk about him. He is always either about to be taken seriously or is already taken seriously. And yet, he keeps needing reintroduction.
Yeah, it is a strange admixture. So let's fast forward to the modern era. Aquaman gets a major re spotlight with DC's new 52 relaunch in 2011. The new run leans into the joke. People in the universe mock him. And then the story tries to prove he's terrifyingly capable. The DC listing for Aquaman in 2011, number one, puts that relaunch front and center.
I want to turn our attention now to why Aquaman became a joke and why the joke actually stuck.
Why don't you do that?
Let's do it. We should address the talks to fish thing head on because it's basically a cultural case study.
You know, Chandler, it's partially about translation. Comics can portray telepathy with sea life, wide-ranging marine influence, and high-stakes ocean threats. But when that gets reduced to a quick cultural shorthand, it becomes he chats with goldfish.
And there's also a deeper issue. For decades, superhero power was associated with things like flight, strength, invulnerability, street level action. Aquaman's domain is a space many readers don't experience personally, deep ocean. And it's harder to imagine as immediately relevant compared to, say, a hero stopping a bank robbery.
I think that's really hard to imagine, Dr. Weaver, until you remember that most of the planet is ocean anyway.
Yes, that is absolutely correct. The joke relies on ignoring scale. Aquaman's power set, taken seriously, is massive. Navigation, pressure resistance, speed, strength, intelligence, command presence, and a relationship to the largest ecosystem on Earth.
That's nothing to sneeze at. Let's look at the cultural implications, what Aquaman reflects in each era. In the early era, the ocean is treated like a frontier, mysterious, dangerous, a place where threats hide. This fits into 1940s and 50s imagination. Exploration, large-scale naval power, Cold War anxieties.
Indeed. And Aquaman becomes a symbol of control over the unknown. He's not just from the sea, he masters it.
Yes, he does. And Atlantis is doing something else too. It's a fantasy of a lost civilization, advanced, secretive, morally complicated even. And that makes Aquaman more than an adventurer. It makes him political.
And political superheroes raise large questions that street level heroes don't. If you're a king, what does justice look like? How do you balance tradition and reform? Do you protect your own people first or focus on the whole world?
Yes, Aquaman's cultural positioning also intersects with masculinity. For a long time, serious male hero meant certain aesthetics: dark rooftops, fists, grit, city crime. Aquaman is bright, aquatic, royal, and sometimes quite ornate.
So people treated him as less tough, even though the ocean is basically a constant endurance test.
And modern versions often overcorrect. More severity, more edge, more violence, because comics sometimes respond to mockery by turning the dial to intimidating.
Here's an issue we haven't looked at yet, friends, the environmental storytelling impact. Here's the big modern implication. As public awareness grows around climate change, pollution, and overfishing, Aquaman becomes newly relevant. He's the superhero most tied to questions in the real world, like who owns the ocean's resources? What does protection mean when the threat is systematic? And how do surface politics affect the sea and vice versa?
Aquaman can make environmental issues feel like plot, not just lecture. The ocean isn't just scenery, folks. It's a stakeholder.
Okay. Let's zoom out a little here. Aquaman's history is also a history of the American superhero comic as a medium.
Because he's a character more than anyone else who survives multiple definitions of what comics are supposed to be. In the Golden Age, it's straightforward adventure morality, heroes as problem solvers. In the Silver Age, it's expanded continuity, science, fantasy world building, and cleaner myth structures. In the Bronze Age and after, there's more social texture, more complicated institutions, more psychologically driven arcs. And in the modern era, there's self awareness. Comics acknowledging their own reputations, breaking the fourth wall, as we say in theater, and re arguing their legitimacy.
Now, Aquaman is like a living timeline. You can watch comics trying to answer what does a superhero need to be right now in order to matter?
And every reinvention is also a marketing argument. No, really, this character is important, which tells you how the industry works. Characters are brands, but they are also mirrors. If you are new to Aquaman and you want to read him as a cultural history, here's kind of a useful lens rather than a strict list.
Look for three Aquamen depending on just what you want. Aquaman is a mythic ruler. You get a lot of Atlantis politics, diplomacy, the burden of leadership. Aquaman is an adventure hero, sea monsters, lost technology, exploration energy. Aquaman is a modern reframe stories that confront the joke and rebuild him as credible.
And pay attention, folks, to what the ocean represents in each run. Is it fear, wonder, power, ecological crisis, colonial extraction, or home?
So, Aquaman isn't just underwater Superman or the guy people tease. He's a character whose entire identity sits on a fault line: surface world versus ocean world, myth versus modernity, comedy reputation versus real narrative power.
And if you want a clean takeaway, Aquaman's longevity shows that superhero stories aren't only about punching villains. They're about what a culture decides is worth protecting and how it imagines power should be used.
Also, the ocean is not just some side setting, folks. It's the majority of our Earth. Any hero who owns that space is automatically dealing with some huge stakes, whether audiences took it seriously at the time or not.
Hey, if you enjoyed this episode, come back for more in our continuing series on comic books and superheroes, how they reflect culture, politics, fears, and ideals. Like the episode, please, and subscribe. And we'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Looking forward to it, folks. Bye for now.
Stay curious, and we'll see you next time.